Hi, my name is John Early and I'm at the RRS annual meeting, and today I am talking with Fred. Fred, can you give us a little background about the science you're doing right now?
Sure. I work on a project that aims to elucidate the effects of space radiation on cognition in mice.
Very interesting. How's the process going? Where are you at with things?
So I'm a second year student. So far I have a manuscript accepted and working on a few more. So things are moving along pretty swiftly.
Excellent. Is it challenging to extrapolate space conditions to Earth conditions? Are there a lot of barriers to that?
Yeah, our limitation is really on dose rates. Mice have a single exposure at an accelerator. It is prohibitively expensive to continuously expose mice. So that's our main barrier right now in space radiation biology.
So how do you adapt for that, since you can't do the continuous exposure, how do you adapt for that difference between, I mean, obviously you don't have a mouse in space, so how do you adapt to that to try and make that as close as possible?
We're going to be limited to that for a long time, I think, until accelerator technologies catch up. Or it might be that we send a human to Mars first and see what happens.
So currently, the frequency of testing, daily, weekly, monthly, how does it go?
So for us, mice receive a single exposure, like I said. We have different time points at which we test mice in behavioral assays. And we immediately sacrifice animals right after and do the molecular work thereafter. So.
Ethically as possible.
Of course.
Right. What is your hope to uncover with this research?
We hope to inform NASA of the risks associated with deep space travel, and this will help them in turn build a risk model for astronauts.
So ideally the end result will be a model that can predict risk more accurately, or will it ultimately reduce exposures?
Well, NASA's main concern at the moment is building a good shield for space radiation. If we know what dosages and what particles will elicit the more serious damages, then they can shift the shielding research to fit these needs.
Okay, so you're talking about risk assessment in space. Is the work you're doing simply for risk assessment, or is there also a preventative measure attached to it?
Well, hopefully the risk assessment will inform preventative measures, how NASA designs shielding, where their energies and particle choices should be as a priority for shield choices. But there is a little bit of carryover. Charged particle irradiators are being used more and more to treat cancer. And so this does inform the field a little bit, although our energies are a lot higher than you typically use for therapy.
So but there is a little bit of overlap for other disciplines?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Talk to me, or do you have to do any, are you doing any current using the shielding? Like with the application of the radiation, are you testing any of the shielding to create a variable set, or is it just leaving everything, all the variables are on the genetics at the moment and we're just bombarding?
That's right, yeah. Hopefully the field will move in the direction of shielding in the future. But right now we need to just simply understand what each particle, each dosage is, and hopefully soon mixed fields due to cognition.
So what is the most challenging part of your research?
Certainly extrapolating behavioral results. We want to make sure that the effects we observe are due to irradiation and not handling of animals, not the conditions at which they're housed.
So what made you get into this line of research? What really drew you towards it?
I knocked on Dr. Allen's door one day. I was sort of taking a year off from school. I just finished undergrad, and I was working at a coffee house, and one of the regulars just really liked chatting with me, and I told him I had a big interest in neurobiology. So he gave me my PI, Dr. Allen's number. I called him up, set up a meeting with him just to ask some questions as to where the field was headed, things like that. And immediately he just asked me, hey, when can you start? When can you come start volunteering in the lab and getting your hands wet? And so it took off
So you've just always had this inquisitive nature about neurobiology?
In my view, neurobiology is one of the last final big unanswered frontiers. There's just so much we don't know about the brain. And I hope and expect that in my lifetime, so many of these questions we have will be answered. So it's a very exciting field to be in right now.
Working with space radiation's effects on the brain, space is always in the equation. What are your thoughts about space travel? What are your thoughts about humanity moving forward? And what are the radiation concerns from your perspective where you're at?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think it's extremely important that we explore our universe. It sort of helps us understand so many questions about our origin. I think just simply developing the technology to get people on other planets is extremely important for industry as well. I think in the Apollo mission, so many new technologies were developed and eventually distributed throughout the world, and that was equally as beneficial to mankind. As far as space radiation goes, we do have some serious problems from my perspective. I think in-flight problems might arise from radiation, and that remains a very big obstacle. But I think we need to do it. I think no expedition comes without cost. I mean, even the early pioneers, you know, traveling across the frontiers of the United States, those were no easy travels. You know, it's every great risk comes with great reward. So I think that's what we need to keep our minds on.
They sounds like you have a very adventurous spirit. What do you hope to do in the future? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years?
I hope to pursue a postdoc after this, and should things go well, should I decide to remain in academia, I would happily live out my days in academia.
So what's your favorite book?
I really like the book Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks. It's sort of a lot of case studies, mostly by patients that he's had. He's a neurologist, I'm not sure if I've said that yet. And yeah, it's just various oddities of people with very rare disabilities and how they manifest in music. And so it's a really gripping tale about the mysteries of the brain, and it makes me really appreciate how much we don't know every time I read it.
So coming back to your primary research, what do you hope is the takeaway, not only for NASA, but what do you hope is the takeaway for humanity in general from the work that you're trying to do?
Well, that there are certain risks associated with deep space travel. It really reminds me that there are so many conditions on our planet that allowed for our very specialized adaptation, and that deep space travel does have a lot of obstacles, but I think it's feasible.
Very cool. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is John, and this is Fred. Thank you for joining us on the RRS Vodcast.